300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field, the last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire offense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Got a great show for you today, including NBC Sports insider Ben Cross, who will be joining me at the end of the show at about 8:30, so make sure to stay tuned for that. But we start with what was probably one of the wildest finishes that you will see in an NFL game, a Monday Night Football game, the first Monday Night Football game of the season, the Raiders and the Ravens. And I'm not just going to touch on the entire game, because I know that a lot of people have been talking about this game, but I want to focus specifically on the ending. And the reason is because in sports, one of the beautiful things about sports is that just when you think the probable is going to happen, that's when the improbable happens. Right? It's one of the most kind of precarious situations to either be leading late, and what do you do with the time and clock situation? That's always going to rear its kind of ugly head when we look at NFL games, especially down the stretch. And this is an all-time classic finish to an NFL game, and it couldn't have come at a better time, the first Monday Night Football game of the season. And you've got Allegiant Stadium, the first time that in Las Vegas, you've got fans in the arena, or in that stadium, really. It almost feels like an arena, given the buzz, given the electricity that was in there. And you got Derek Carr, and you got John Gruden, you got big personalities there. And so it was only fitting that this game would end in the manner and in the fashion that it did, given all of the electricity in the building. But the thing is, the one thing we know in sports is that it ain't over till you hear the final buzzer sound. That's one of the fundamental, it's one of the core principles that coaches always try and reinforce, no matter what the sport is. No matter if it's tennis and you got a match point, you got to finish the last point. Basketball, until the last buzzer sounds. The same thing with the NFL. And yet, despite that being the case, despite that appearing to be a universal truth, there still are numerous examples of teams that falter down the stretch. And just like everyone else, when Bryan Edwards made that catch and he was reaching for the pylon, it seemed like the game was over. Referees ruled it a touchdown. The players were celebrating. They're pumping music, blasting music into Allegiant Stadium. Everyone had the same thought process. Again, the players were even hugging and consoling one another already. And so you're thinking to yourself, well, here we go. Raiders 1-0, Ravens 0-1. Let's see what happens in week 2. Play is reversed. And so you're saying, well, this is Derek Carr, this is John Gruden, this is Josh Jacobs. They got 1 yard to go. They're going to punch it in. And then the worst thing happens, the false start. And this is why this game possessed everything you love about football and everything you hate and absolutely despise about football all at the same time. Because one 300-pound dude on the right side moved his butt by an inch, and it's a false start, and you got to move the entire offense 5 yards back. It's absolutely excruciating. It's demoralizing. And as a coach, it's probably the worst thing that you can receive and be on the receiving end of is a false start penalty. And now, of course, as predictable as it would be, incompletion on 2nd and 10, and then a pick in the end zone by Carr. So now momentum is entirely with Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, who appear to be dejected on the sideline. They had packed up their suitcase. They're ready to head back home to face the Chiefs. And all of a sudden, they're sprung back out onto the field. And you're thinking, well, this is going to be a textbook, literally Hollywood ending, maybe a Marquise Hollywood touchdown pass from Lamar Jackson. And then we get the fumble. And then John Gruden doesn't get his field goal team ready in time, or field goal unit ready in time to kick a field goal. You take an inexplicable delay of game that actually all of a sudden nullifies your decision to kick a field goal. Now you send the offense back out onto the field, and you win with a game-winning touchdown. But this is one of the reasons why the Las Vegas Raiders have been one of the most frustrating teams to root for, is because we know how much potential they have. We know how much talent that they have. Darren Waller is an absolute monster. He was targeted 19 times. But the problem with the Raiders, and the question about whether this will propel them to the playoffs, has nothing to do with the first 2 months of the season. It never has. The biggest problem, the biggest impediment to the Las Vegas Raiders was not their inability to win games against quality teams. It was their inability to win games in the second half of the season. You look at this team last year in 2020, first 9 games of the year, they go 6-3. Tons of quality wins over the Saints, at the Chiefs, at the Browns. All 3 teams were not only teams that reached the playoffs, but teams that actually reached at least the divisional round of the playoffs. And then what happens? They go 2-5 in the final 7 games of the year. The first 2.5 months of the season, Raiders are great. John Gruden's speeches are resonating. It's the final final half of the season where they falter and they kind of decay and fall apart. The same thing happened in 2019, 6-4 through the first 10, 1-5 in the final 6. And so the reason I bring this up is because, to me, while on paper, everything would suggest that the Raiders should be a good enough team to reach the playoffs. And I would love to see an Allegiant Stadium buzzing the way that it would be. Imagine a playoff atmosphere in Las Vegas. And I'm not advocating for fans or for people attending the game to be consuming alcoholic beverages, but just think about the environment. You're in Las Vegas. You got a professional football team. You've got incredible DJs, world-renowned DJs in there, and you got a playoff atmosphere. It'd be absolutely electric to be there. But the reality is, I don't see this team improving that much more than last year. They were 8-8 last year. And even with this win that should generate some momentum, and I hope it can catapult them forward, they're probably still going to finish 9-8 because the Ravens should have won this game. And that's no knock on the Raiders, because in football, it's about finding ways to win. And at the end of the day, they did in the most dramatic fashion possible and in the most John Gruden-esque way possible. So for that, they deserve our appreciation and our applause. But this better be something that propels them forward. Otherwise, it was all for naught once again. So that's kind of what I think. And of course, just a wild finish, a roller coaster of emotions, but wouldn't have wanted it to end in any other way. Now, here is another story that's been starting to brew. Very interesting. Another story involving a prominent coordinator at the NFL level, and that's Eric Bieniemy. Now, obviously, we know that the USC football program just fired Clay Helton. And I'm a UCLA guy, so quite frankly, I would have been happy if Clay Helton stayed in there, even though he's a very nice guy. He was just a mediocre coach. He did win a Rose Bowl in 2016. But the thing is, after that loss to Stanford, Mike Bohn, the athletic director, finally came to his senses and realized, okay, we can no longer retain this type of coach. USC is a historic program that has decorated athletes across from top to bottom. And all of a sudden, we've got this offensive coordinator, one of the best offensive coordinators in the game, Eric Bieniemy, Andy Reid's protege, this offensive genius who's emerging as a candidate. Now, just for some context, because most people won't know, Eric Bieniemy actually is really kind of from Southern California. Played his high school ball at Bishop Amat, which is in La Puente, California. He played as a running back at Colorado. He's a star running back at Colorado, so he's familiar with the Pac-12, with its ties, what it represents, the culture that it tries to foster, that it tries to cultivate. And when we think about USC and when they were at the height of their dominance, and they're multiple decades, it spans, to their credit, it spans multiple decades. They've won 9 national championships. But when USC has been the most relevant and been the most successful is when they've had coaches that have either had NFL experience or continue to go on to have NFL experience. John Robinson, great coach, started his career with SC, then became the head coach of the LA Rams, then came back to USC, 1976 to 1984, won a national championship in 1778. They didn't have football back then. 1978 wins a national championship. And so you think about guys like that. You think about Pete Carroll, how he started his career with the Jets and the Patriots and then became the head coach at USC, won back-to-back titles in 2003, 2004. Then obviously left to go on to be the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. Those are obviously the days of Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush and Lendell White and some tremendous players, Troy Polamalu, some tremendous athletes and studs on that team. The only kind of exceptions you have at USC, John McKay, who, again, most people probably don't know, 1960 to 1975, won 4 national titles at USC. And though he started his career at the college level, he ended up being the head football coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, again, you've got those ties from the college to the NFL level. And the final guy, and unfortunately I can't claim to have been alive, no one did, Howard Jones, was the head football coach 1925 to 1940. And the only reason why he didn't have any NFL experience is because the NFL's inception was in 1920, so it really wasn't that successful up to that point. So the reason why this makes sense to me, having a guy like Eric Bieniemy be the head coach, again, if this report is true and if this is a mutual interest from both parties, the biggest reason why, to me, this would be a huge coup for USC is because what are Eric Bieniemy's greatest strengths? This guy is an offensive genius, as I had mentioned, Andy Reid's protege, but he's great not only with running backs, but he's great at developing quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes has absolutely raved about him since he's been with the Kansas City Chiefs. In fact, the Chiefs have had one of the best offenses, if not the best offense in the NFL for the last several years. They've had the best offense 2 out of the last 3 years, and the one season they didn't was because Mahomes missed a couple games. And even with his absence, they still finished as a top 5 team in offense in the NFL. So the thing that USC has been lacking the most is recruiting at the quarterback level, especially recently. And that's where I think Eric Bieniemy could prove to work wonders with a program like USC, is because not only does he have a track record of, by the way, developing Adrian Peterson and Jamal Charles in their prime. Those two guys combined for 7 Pro Bowls and 8 seasons under Eric Bieniemy as a running backs coach, because that's how he got his career started from a coaching perspective. But then from a quarterback perspective, you're looking at USC and you're saying to yourself, you got Bryce Young and DJ Uiagalelei in your backyard. Young at Mater Dei, which is in Santa Ana, California, an hour away from USC. Uiagalelei, St. John Bosco's in Bellflower. That's about 45 minutes from USC. These guys are in your backyard. Now, in fairness, Young was committed, but then he left to flee greener pastures at Alabama. Those guys, you can't just let those guys go. There's a guy named Jake Garcia, who was a former four-star quarterback out of Narbonne in California. Then he fled to go to Georgia. These are elite prospects that USC has had within their grasp. And so with a guy like Eric Bieniemy, with the cachet that he has, with the respect that players have for him, I would almost argue that it's more important for the players to respect the coach more at the college level than at the NFL level, because at the college level, these guys are still maturing. They're seeking role models. They're seeking guys that they can look up to. And the amount of cachet, the amount of clout that a guy in Eric Bieniemy would have at the collegiate level, I think would prove absolute wonders for a program like USC that desperately needs a new face, that desperately needs someone with credibility, with backing, that the boosters would support. We obviously know that a main factor behind every major athletic decision at USC is because of the boosters that support that school, that fund their program. So there's even a recruit in 2023. I don't know how much into the weeds everyone is as far as recruiting, but in 2023, there's a kid, Malachi Nelson, who's from Southern California, a five-star quarterback, the number one quarterback prospect in the class of 2023. He's committed to Oklahoma. So a guy like that doesn't come away, doesn't leave your state, perhaps if you've got a guy in Eric Bieniemy there. That's what I'm thinking. So the only concern that you'd have is whether he would jump ship to attain an NFL head coaching job if he was to experience some success at the collegiate level. And that's certainly something that Mike Bohn has weighed and considered. But I think it's something that you absolutely need to consider and need to be taking a serious look at if you're USC. Again, if the interest is mutual, I think that's a match made in heaven. I definitely think that's someone that could totally transform the relevancy of the program. They experienced some success with Lane Kiffin and with Steve Sarkisian and with Ed Ogeron and with Larry Scott and now with Clay Helton. But think about when they were really relevant. Guys with some NFL experience. Brian Stevenson, he would be perfect. I appreciate the validation with that. So I don't really see, not to mention, again, he's got the background as a running backs coach as well. What was USC's bread and butter for years? Reggie Bush, Mr. Heisman. Bring back some of these elite running backs. That's how you do it. So that's what I would say on that front. Shifting to a very different sports topic. Don't want to take too much time. Again, my NBC Sports Insider, Ben Cross, is joining me in about 10 minutes or so to discuss the NFL, some college football. Going to be a great conversation with him. But there was actually a major announcement on the United States Soccer Federation. They just announced as of Tuesday that they're offering the respective players' unions for the United States women's national team and the United States men's national team the same proposed contract, kind of CBA agreement, the same players' union agreement. The goal is to kind of align the men's and women's programs into one single kind of contract. Essentially, they said a single bargaining agreement structure. So let me first say this. Overall, there's no question this is a good thing for women's soccer. This is a good thing for the soccer in the United States. But let's be clear about something. We all know that large organizations carry a lot of clout and can push narratives at ease and with ease because they have the resources to do it. So if they want a narrative to be pushed out there, they can do it. And the reality is, let's be full 100 about this. This is not, the goal of this was not out of simply to align both the men's and the women's to a single bargaining agreement. No, that is total bogus. That is total malarkey. That is absolute nonsense. The reason and the impetus behind this decision is because of how much blowback the United States Soccer Federation has received from the women's player unions. that have been lamenting the pay scale and the disparity in pay between the men and the women programs and the national teams. And that's why you've got the women's side lambasting the United States Soccer Federation for years, complaining and ridiculing them for their discrimination in pay. And when you think about who has been the most vocal team and the most outspoken cohort of women athletes, of female athletes, it's been the United States women's national team that have been the most outspoken on this issue, complaining and championing the need for equal pay. You've got the Megan Rapinos, you've got the Ambi Wambachs, you've got the Alex Morgans. And in fact, there's actually there's a current lawsuit that exists that 28 women have filed against or a lawsuit alleging gender discrimination over violations of the Equal Pay Act. And so when we think about soccer in the United States, if we're totally being honest about this, it's been the United States women's team that's carried the mantle. They are the much more decorated team when it comes to United States soccer. The men's team can't hold a candle to what the United States women's team has been able to do. The job that they've done, not only on the domestic level, but the international level. Internationally, they're renowned and universally known and regarded as the number one women's international soccer team in the world. And in fact, when you look at their accomplishments and you look at their accolades, they've been the number one international women's national soccer team ever. They've won the Olympic gold, the Olympics, they've won 4 times, 1996, 2004, 2008, 2012. They've won the World Cup 4 times, 91, 99, 2015, 2019. They were the runner-ups in 2011. They finished with a 3rd place finish at the World Cup 3 other times. They've won the CONCACAF Gold Cup 8 times. And if we actually evaluate this women's national team, they've generated actually so much more money to the U.S., to the Soccer Federation, than the men's team, if we're being fully honest about it. So I understand why they're complaining about it, why they've complained about it for years. And again, it'd be one thing if you're looking at the WNBA and the WNBA is requesting the same amount and they're requesting equal compensation to the NBA, despite the fact that they're playing fewer games, because that's not a gender discrimination thing. That's a scheduling issue where you're not playing the same number of games, so it's harder to argue for the same pay. We see that in tennis. That's not an issue. Emma Raducanu and Daniil Medvedev received the same purse, $2.5 million, for winning the U.S. Open. That's not an issue with tennis, and yet the U.S. women's national team is arguably the most popular women's sports team in the world. You can honestly argue that. So, again, I agree that I'm glad to see that they're being compensated fairly, or at least it appears to be heading in that direction, because all the evidence suggests that they should be, both financially and from an accomplishments and an achievement standpoint. But this is kind of long overdue, and this is just the way of the United States Soccer Federation trying to rectify a mishandling that they did years ago. But that is what it is. Final topic before I'm bringing on my NBC Sports Insider, Ben Cross, joining me in just 5 minutes. One NBA topic that I did want to touch on briefly. Aaron Gordon signed a 4-year, $92 million extension with the Denver Nuggets. And obviously this was a no-brainer for the Denver Nuggets, but not for the reasons you might think. The reason is not because he's an excellent player. Because Aaron Gordon, as much as I respect the hell out of him out of Arizona, he's not an excellent player. He's a good player. He's a good player who the Denver Nuggets traded several assets to acquire. Got rid of Gary Harris, RJ Hampton, 1st-round pick in 2025. So to me, This is kind of the same situation that the Portland Trailblazers are in, which is they go out and they sign Norman Powell, UCLA guy who I absolutely love, but by giving up so many assets, you have to validate that decision. And if you don't sign Norman Powell to that huge extension, which he deserves and I'm happy he got, then you just wasted all the other assets that you had to acquire him. And the same thing can be said for Aaron Gordon. But the difference is when you look at the NBA, sure, defense is a big contributing factor to winning championships, but stars win titles in the NBA. The NFL, it's a slightly different combination. Stars win, but coaching is extremely pivotal. In baseball, it's pitching. Pitching is absolutely crucial come October. That's what wins you World Series. But in the NBA, it's a little bit different because it appeared that last year, or prior to last year, rather, the days of the kind of two-star team, the days of two-star players comprising a championship team appear to be over. Because you had LeBron and AD winning titles. And mind you, that when the formula was for defense and stars, it was really the stars that carried the day. The Lakers did have the number one defense at the time, but it was LeBron and AD, Shaq and Kobe. Same thing with the Warriors. The Warriors had an elite defense, but it was Steph, it was KD, it was Clay. Same thing with the Bucks with Giannis, Middleton, and Drew Holiday. And I think the problem stems from the fact that Michael Porter Jr., as much as he's been ascending, he hasn't ascended to the level that I think the Denver Nuggets needed him to be at this point in his career. And that's why, to me, this signing for Aaron Gordon is simply good, because when you look at what he's meant to this team, last year was a perfect opportunity for him to showcase what he's all about. Now, I understand he's a versatile defender, which I'll touch on in a second, but this is a guy who in 25 games after being traded from the Orlando Magic, in 25 games, averaged 10 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. In the playoffs, when Jamal Murray had already tore his ACL and he wasn't available, the guy averaged 11 points and 5 rebounds in 2 series as the perhaps designated second best player behind Jokic at the time. Well, that type of contribution is not nearly enough. I'm not saying he doesn't warrant the type of contract that he's making, but whenever I hear the argument, well, he's an elite defender, so he needs to be rewarded and compensated like that. Well, Drew Holiday, in his own right, defended the hell out of Chris Paul and all these elite guards, and yet he still averaged 17 points, 9 assists, and 6 rebounds, not only in the finals, but the entire postseason. And yet, he's still producing on both ends of the floor. So, again, for me, the problem with the Denver Nuggets, it's not that this is a bad signing. It's not. It's a good contract extension. Happy for Aaron Gordon. But the reality is, I just think this solidifies them as a really good team, and I think that Jokic and Murray are a great core. But I don't think that Aaron Gordon is going to be enough, even if he remains with this team for 5 years down the line. I don't think that he's going to be what kind of tips the scales in the favor of the Denver Nuggets. Again, I like Aaron Gordon, happy he got his money, but I just think that this is kind of a so-and-so type of signing, personally. Okay. Now it's my pleasure to bring on a friend of the show. It's been a little bit. It's been an off season, but someone who's well in tune with the NFL, with college football. My pleasure to bring on now NBC Sports' Ben Cross onto the show. And Ben, as I bring you on, first of all, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Jonah. It's good to be back on. It's been some time, as you mentioned.
It's been some time. I know you were extremely busy. NBC was covering the Olympics. By the way, how was that experience overall, really quickly, for you?
I thought it went well. I think if you watched digitally, we certainly had to share some content across a lot of platforms. So there was a little bit of organizational crisis there. But I thought it went well. The fact that we were able to host that event and broadcast it to so many, given the last year or so and everything that's happened, I thought it was really great that they were able to hold it avoid any sort of an outbreak. It was a really cool event, I thought.
So let's transition to the NFL. And before I get into some of the games that took place on Sunday, I have to start with the game that took place on Monday night, the Raiders and the Ravens. It's so funny, Ben. To me, it encompassed everything you love about football and everything you absolutely despise about football all in the same moment. That false start for Carr was just excruciating and demoralizing to see. What did you make just overall of the ending of this finish? And do you think from the Raiders' perspective, this is enough to propel them to perhaps making the playoffs this year?
I think with the NFL, given how long of a season it is now and how competitive it is, I don't think you want to draw too many conclusions from week one. It's a great sign for the Raiders. The Ravens are a good team. This is a good one to pick up in their conference. It certainly helps them out. I'm not necessarily going to say that the Raiders are in a great position now. It was a very exciting game, to your original point. The Ravens really gave up that game. They gave every chance to the Raiders at the end of regulation to sneak back in that game and take it to overtime. Once it went to overtime, I had no doubt the Raiders were going to take it with momentum, and that crowd was incredible. But if you look at it, the Raiders definitely had some issues in the first half, things that they'll want to get corrected going forward. And I think those things ultimately probably won't get corrected as much as Raiders fans would like to see, as we've seen in years past, and ultimately they'll stumble along the way. That's just a prediction. It is a great start regardless. If you're the Ravens, you don't necessarily need to do too much introspection. You saw you had what it took to win the game. You just didn't do what you needed to do. And it was a very exciting finish, obviously, with the two kicks at the end of regulation to send it to overtime, and then the looping play. It looked like Marlon Humphreys maybe gave up on that play a little bit, just didn't quite have the energy left in the tank at that point to catch up to that pass. But it was a very exciting game. Obviously, the crowd was raucous. Great to see. Great for the NFL. Great way to close out week one.
And now when we shift to the Rams and the Bears, to me, this is precisely why Sean McVay traded for Matthew Stafford. The opportunity to open up the playbook, to hit on some home run plays. We saw the first two touchdowns for the Rams, 67-yard pass to Jefferson, touchdown pass to Jefferson, then Coop hit on a 50-plus yard bomb. And when you think about last year, the Rams only had two 50-yard home run plays for touchdowns last year. They get two in the opening game. What were your initial thoughts just on Matthew Stafford and this new look Rams after their win over the Bears?
Well, as you mentioned, this is exactly what Stafford was brought in to do. Now, obviously, you don't want to look at Goff and say, wow, was he really holding back the Rams that much? He might have been. I didn't think Stafford did anything particularly special. I thought he did what he's done in Detroit when he's had opportunities. There were some blown coverages in the back end of the secondary for the Bears, things that they're not accustomed to making or mistakes they're not accustomed to making. But he was good enough. He hit receivers when he needed to. He dropped them into buckets on the sideline when he needed to. They stayed ahead of the pace a little bit. The Bears did not go away without a fight. They had several long drives that got them back in the game. But every time the Rams just had an answer, and it came from Matthew Stafford. Obviously, given what they gave up to get Stafford and given what they gave up to get all their current players, they're in win-now mode. They don't have an opportunity to look forward 5 years down the line, draft a few guys. They don't have high draft picks. They're going to have to be really resourceful with who they bring in. But right now, they have a very good team, and I wouldn't be shocked if they compete certainly in the NFC, which I think is a weaker NFC than it has been in years past, and then could potentially challenge a team like the Buccaneers or the Chiefs. I mean, we'll see if their offense can keep pace. But week one, they absolutely did what they came out to do. I didn't think they did anything special, but their offense was what they needed it to be, explosive plays, and their defense, while you could argue that the big bad pass rush was a little bit subdued. Aaron Donald double-teamed on a lot of different plays, but it also wasn't his best performance, and yet he still was a disruptor at the end of the game and did what he needed to do. Jalen Ramsey's incredible. He was able to hold Allen Robinson and really any of those Bears receivers to just about nothing. So I thought the team did exactly what they set out to do. I didn't think they did anything special, but with the preseason expectations so high for the Rams, I thought they met them, and now they can move on to week two and see if they can keep it up at a consistent rate, because if they can, as I said, I think they absolutely could contend for a title this year.
Now, on the flip side, I've always been on the side of the argument, start Justin Fields and don't look back. Just start him week one. I thought start him week one and he'll just figure it out. I understood to some degree the rationale of not wanting to start him against the Rams, given the defense that you just alluded to. To me, Ben, you've got Cincinnati next week. I know that they upset, or you could argue they upset the Vikings, which was an impressive win in overtime. They're much less daunting, much less intimidating. I say this is the time that you start him. I thought that even in the 5 plays, even in the 5 snaps that he was out there, the Bears just seem to have so much more juice and so much more life and exuberance that you just didn't see from Andy Dalton, who was fine. What are your thoughts on Justin Fields in week 2? Do you think they should start him, or you think that Matt Nagy should hold on and keep him on the sidelines a little longer?
I think they start him. I didn't think it was some sort of egregious decision to go with Andy Dalton. That being said, I think it quickly became that when you saw what the Rams came out in. Like, if this was the Bears of old, last decade or so, you could say, all right, Andy Dalton could fit pretty well, could get some wins. He was a more efficient Mitch Trubisky in this game. He did what he needed to do. The offense wasn't completely lackluster. But when you have an offense like the Rams on the other side of the field, and they're dropping bombs, they're scoring in 2 plays, you can't keep up with that with a quarterback like Andy Dalton. He doesn't have a 70-yard arm. I mean, you saw it with the Saints this week as well. Drew Brees, all the credit to him. He's a Hall of Famer. He didn't have the big arm that he used to in his career. He wasn't able to go down the field as much, and their offense struggled from that. They had to take longer drives. They took more time to score. You saw that with the Bears with Andy Dalton. They didn't necessarily have that down-the-field threat. Granted, they're going up against a great secondary, and not many teams can go that deep with them, but if you need to keep up the pace, you can't have 7 to 10 play drives. You can't take 10 minutes off the clock just to be able to score 1 touchdown. You have to keep pace, and Justin Fields gives you the best chance to do that. Now, against the Bengals, as you mentioned, not necessarily the fiercest opponent, I think it is a perfect opportunity to roll out Justin Fields and say, this is not that big of an opponent. You can beat this team. We can beat this team if we just play the style that we've been used to playing. Now, the defense isn't quite what it used to be, but I think Justin Fields gives them the best chance to have the most success. I think they'll win games with either quarterback. Won't necessarily be dynamic with either quarterback because it is Justin Fields' rookie year. But as you mentioned, let him figure it out. He's a rookie quarterback. He's clearly a smart guy. He is a competitor. He's not just going to take failure as it is and leave it be. He's going to try and improve. And if he makes mistakes, he's going to want to go to the sideline, look at the Microsoft Surface tablet and get in the booth and say, what can I do better? And I don't see any reason why, if you're going to draft him in the position that you did, that you wouldn't give him a chance. Like, sometimes I get if you have a really good veteran quarterback who is clearly going to win you games, letting the rookie say, all right, I'm going to learn from this legend. Andy Dalton's not going to teach him something right now as a starter. Like, Andy Dalton's a good backup to have for Justin Fields because he can bounce things off of him and say, hey, when I had that arm, when I had that athleticism, I was able to do this and this. But as a starter, he's not going to be able to teach him that much. And I think you got to roll him out and let him make his own mistakes and let him figure it out. And maybe this is a rebuilding year because of that. But Andy Dalton's not going to bring you to the heavens if you don't do that. So it's a tricky situation. I get it. But at the same time, I think the answer is pretty clear right now. Let Justin Fields figure it out.
And not to mention, to the credit of both of these guys, I think that they've handled this situation about as well as you can, given the fierce competition that exists. Obviously, I think that Justin Fields has shown enough reverence for Andy Dalton. He's shown enough to kind of support him, at least entering that first game. And I think Andy Dalton has kind of praised Justin Fields. And understandably, he's a competitor. He's going to say, it's my time. So, I didn't take huge issue with it. But I'll be honest, just those first couple plays, I'm thinking, Justin Fields looks great. 1 pass and 1 touchdown run. But, okay, so now let's shift to the Steelers and the Buffalo Bills. To me, Ben, I can't use rationale at all with this, and I'm totally going to be a prisoner of the moment here. I don't really care. I know I'll get absolutely shredded for this. I don't really know what it is about the Pittsburgh Steelers this year, but my guess is that this is the first time since like 20 years, since like 2 decades before Ben Roethlisberger, that I think there have been no expectations on the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they could finally kind of just fly under the radar, under the spotlight. I wouldn't be surprised at all, even with the hardest strength of schedule, that this team finds a way to win 11 or 12 games. Can I back this up with any logic whatsoever? No, I can't. But there's something about Mike Tomlin, this defense. They don't lose. They were 8-8 with Devlin Hodges. I was really impressed with this win. I'm going to totally overreact to it. I know it's week 1. What were your thoughts on the Steelers and their upset win?
Well, it obviously wasn't a pretty win. They needed to rely a lot on that defense, which that defense is ferocious. Paying TJ Watt was not a mistake. They needed to put that out there and say, we're committing to the defense. We're committing to these pass rushers, these playmakers. If you're looking at the Steelers, and if you are a Steelers fan, the last few years you've been waiting for a healthy Ben Roethlisberger. You've been waiting for that leader on that offense to not be totally incompetent and lose you games. Devlin Hodges, they're, as you mentioned, that 8-8 record, they had a few quarterbacks that they threw out there that won games, and people are saying, well, is this the quarterback that's going to replace Roethlisberger? Not quite. None of them necessarily fit the billing. But with a competent quarterback in Ben Roethlisberger, this team and that defense can do a lot of different things. To your point, I could very well see them win 10, 11 games. The Bills are certainly no slouch. A lot of people pick them to potentially contend in the AFC. I think it's certainly a good start for the Steelers, but they do play a really tough schedule. And given what they did last year, and they stumbled at a few games that they didn't necessarily want to, especially down the stretch, I think they could have a very strong year, but with that division being as tough as it is, we saw Cleveland in week 1 against the Chiefs. That was certainly a great performance. The Ravens put up a good performance against the Raiders, albeit losing it at the end. It's going to be a tough road for them, but I think they have a very solid team, and I see no reason why they can't contend. I think they do have all the parts in place. They have a solid offense. They have dynamic playmakers. Juju, Claypool, they have solid running backs, they have good tight ends, solid quarterback, their defense is all around dominant. They can win games either throwing it down the field or, between the tackles, defense stepping up, win a close game like they did against the Bills. Obviously, their special teams stepped up in big ways against the Bills as well. They can win it in a number of different ways, and with everyone healthy, if they can stay healthy, this team could absolutely contend.
Now, I'm going to give you an opportunity to either defend or ridicule your Dallas Cowboys for a second. I'm going to try and cap it within 5 minutes. Hopefully, you don't exceed that. But were you? I know you could. Oh, I know you could. To me, Ben, I thought what was more encouraging was the simple fact that Dak Prescott, this was his first time that he was out there. Shoulder looked good, arm looked good, his foot, his ankle looked good. It's amazing how it's almost this kind of syndrome that we suffer from where if you've got a major injury on a different part of your body and then you experience a little injury on another part of your body, it almost like overshadows that other injury and makes you forget about it for a second. I almost think that everyone forgot about Dak's ankle injury when his shoulder was a little bit hurt. So what were you more kind of encouraged about the performance you saw from the Cowboys against the Bucs, or what were your kind of big takeaways from them, and how do you see the Cowboys doing this year in the NFC East?
I was very encouraged. I'm not necessarily going to go and call for some sort of NFC East division title, but I was very encouraged because when you look at last year, before Dak was injured, they were promising on offense. They had a ton of yards, but their defense completely overshadowed it and did everything they could to lose games. When you look at the Buccaneers, I don't think many people as Cowboys fans expected the Cowboys to even contend in that one. Both sides of the ball played as well as that I thought they could have. Granted, they made some mistakes and they could have won the game. They did everything they could to win it. But, at the same time, both sides of the ball did everything they could. I mean, the defense slowed down the Buccaneers for the most part. They didn't give up too many explosive plays. They forced them to go down the field. Tom Brady is as good as he's ever been, in my opinion. But the big thing you wanted to look at was Dak, and as you mentioned, those injuries. When I look at two injuries, one on top of another that just happened, you're almost wondering, is this player just breaking down? Is their body just starting to give up? They're a very explosive player. Do they have a long shelf life? And Dak just getting through an entire game against a very good defense. I mean, people want to give Tom Brady a lot of the credit for the Buccaneers' success last year. That defense returns every starter from a Super Bowl champion team. They stepped up against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl and slowed them down. Dak putting up a good performance against them is a very good sign, if he can stay healthy, to lead this offense to win them some games. Now, the defense will have to step up. when they do play lesser opponents and shut them down to even less points. But I thought every aspect of the Cowboys looked good. The play calling was solid. The run game was solid when it needed to be. The pass game downfield was good. Dak was healthy. Defense did what it needed to do on the back end. I thought it was a very promising performance. I don't think they're ready to compete for anything in the playoffs, but given how weak the NFC East still is, I don't see any reason why they can't contend for an NFC East title if they're able to play consistent. That's often been the issue with the Cowboys, but I think all the check boxes you wanted to see as a Cowboys fan were checked in week 1 against a very strong Buccaneers team. It's just so hard to beat Tom Brady. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, it was classic. It was classic Brady. And let's transition to college football for a second. I didn't spend a whole segment to talk about this. UCLA's win over LSU. Now we see Oregon with an upset win over Ohio State on the road. To me, I think that this was just a huge perception change and a huge win from that perspective for the Pac-12, kind of being relegated to perhaps at best the third, if not the fourth, sometimes the fifth best Power 5 conference in college football in recent years. And I think that for those two programs in particular, obviously it hurts when you have USC lose to Stanford, and it hurts when you've got Utah losing on the road to BYU. But let's stick with Oregon and UCLA. How big do you think these wins were in terms of changing the perception perhaps of the Pac-12 and restoring some faith and really some pride within that conference?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, you're already seeing the repercussions of that. People are talking about the Pac-12 as their playoff contending teams now. Now, one thing with the Pac-12, as you mentioned, with Utah losing and USC losing, Washington fell off the face of the earth. They're going in two different directions. The conferences, it's splitting a little bit. UCLA and Oregon need to be the calling cards. They need to win. I would say if those teams can get through with 1 loss per, 2 losses combined, then they will be in a really good space. I think the problem the Pac-12 has had, and I think part of the reason that they haven't been able to be in those conversations late in season, is it cannibalizes itself. Every time some team emerges at 5-6-0, USC has done it in a few years in the past. Arizona State did it a little bit. Utah was looking really promising for a while. Oregon certainly has done it. The conference will eat itself alive. Like that Stanford loss was a pretty hard one to take for the Pac-12. But in general, to your original point, the Pac-12 has been really down in the last few years. They haven't put anyone in the playoff. It is big just to be in that conversation right now. Ohio State, their defense doesn't look great. I wouldn't be shocked if they lose another game here or there. But that was a huge statement win to say, you know what? We can compete with the big dogs, and if we can just get one of these teams to go undefeated or be a one-loss team, we can get them into the playoff. And that's significant. I mean, UCLA and Oregon look like world beaters right now. I think UCLA looks even better, but granted, they haven't played a team of Ohio State caliber. LSU was a huge win, and if they can keep that momentum rolling, have an early bye week this week, which is I'm a little concerned for UCLA on that standpoint. If they can stay energized and stay healthy, stay focused on each week, which is hard to do when you have that early bye week, then I don't see why they can't compete. They have a really dynamic offense, a really dynamic quarterback. Oregon looks like a more typical Oregon team of the last 2-3 years. They're going to be in some close games. They're not going to blow everyone out, but they have a really solid roster. And if they can get Thibodeau back and get some health back on that defense, they could be even better, and then maybe stretch out some of these leads and give themselves some comfort blankets. Because if they don't, as I said, the Pac-12 tends to cannibalize itself. So if you're a Pac-12 fan, you're calling all the other coaches right now and saying, don't put your best 11 out there. We need these two teams to succeed. We need UCLA and Oregon to be one or no loss teams at the end of the year.
And that's the impressive thing, is the fact that Oregon was able to do it without Kayvon Thibodeau. So you knock off a powerhouse and the number one team in the Big Ten, which, by the way, I used to call some high school games of CJ Stroud, who looked really good up until that last throw. Again, he's essentially, this is his first major start of his career. And then on the flip side for UCLA, taking down a team in LSU from the SEC that just won the national championship 2 years ago. And actually Oregon and UCLA face off, I think, in like a month or so. So that'll be a monumental game between those two programs. So let's stick with Southern California. Let's transition to USC a little bit. They obviously just announced the firing of Clay Helton. Listen, he was a nice guy. I think at the end of the day, it was long overdue. I thought they should have fired him earlier than that. I'll leave it at that. But needless to say, they did it now. There have been some rumblings about Eric Bieniemy from the Chiefs. Obviously, the majority of the emerging candidates have been at the collegiate level. What do you think about that job opening in and of itself? And also, who are the candidates that you think could do an admirable job and be the right fit in SC?
It's really tough to say. I think it's got to start with recruiting. I think when you look at what some of these programs who have, had all these big expectations and not necessarily lived up to it, Michigan, Nebraska, one of the things that has hamstrung those teams, Texas, you saw it as well, although we'll see after stumbling this week, is they haven't been able to recruit at the rate they did before. If you can recruit in the top 10 and the top 5, which USC has gotten away from in the last few years, then at the very least, you just need someone to manage all that talent. You don't necessarily need them to be the best X's and O's coach in the world. And California has boatloads of talent. And it is not hard to go out and say, hey, this is the most NFL-ready market you're going to get. You're going to be exposed to all the NIL deals that you could possibly imagine on this gorgeous campus right off of the beach. It is a great selling card to any of those amazing athletes in California. You just have to get someone who can talk to these guys and say, hey, this is where you want to be. Why would you fly all the way to Alabama or Georgia or Clemson? Just stay here. Your family can come watch you. You'll be ready for the pro market. And, I think when you look at some of these candidates, some of them are solid X's and O's guys like Luke Fickell. He's an interesting choice. You mentioned Eric Bieniemy. I think he would be perfect because he's a transition guy. He's one of those guys who has a lot of ideas. He's explosive on offense. He is I think, a very good style for current college football. And he also has that NFL connection to say, well, look what I've done with guys in the NFL. I can get you there. Just stay in the state. I think he would be a great hire. Beyond that, though, as I was mentioning, Luke Fickell, like some of these X's and O's college football guys, they don't necessarily work. Like it can work in certain systems like a ground and pound type or like at a Cincinnati, some smaller school. But a brand like USC, that needs to compete in this explosive offense college environment, you need a coach who's adaptable to that, who has that kind of system. And I think it's more about bringing in the system and less so the actual guy. There are some good names out there, good college football guys. I don't think USC is going to dominate if they stay within college football. I think they need to go beyond that and say, hey, here's our NFL connection. Here's why you should stay in the state. Come to really what was the most dominant program in college football for a long time. I think they have all the resources to do it. They just need to bring in the right system and not necessarily the right guy.
And the interesting thing, I think first of all that Eric Bieniemy would be a perfect choice. I just think that also not only the track record that he's proven with offenses, but with quarterbacks, and you're seeing how Bryce Young and DJ Ucla, those guys were in their backyard and they left and they fled to go to different powerhouses. Today we're not going to touch on Wisconsin because there's not enough time and I don't have enough emotional bandwidth to talk about them at this very moment in time. I will only say that I had a broadcast to do right after the Penn State game, actually literally 15 minutes before a volleyball game. I was a volleyball match. I was finishing up the final couple minutes of the Wisconsin game where we're on. And I remember, Ben, I've said something, I've repeated this now multiple times. There's something that you told me freshman year in the dorms that unfortunately has resonated with me and has only compounded and has been exacerbated every single year that I've been a Wisconsin fan. The first thing you told me is, Jonah, I think we started maybe 5-0. It was Joel Stavi at the helm. Nothing really great about our team, but we were undefeated and I was excited freshman year, expectations. You said, Jonah, just you wait. When you have expectations for this team, they're going to find a way to let you down. And it's absolutely crushing. Ben,
you say let us down early this year, right?
That's the thing. Hopefully UCLA can right the ship. Listen, I'm holding out. I'm holding out hope. Penn State was not a bad loss. We've got a top 10 team in Notre Dame coming up. So there is off of a bye. So there's some potential to kind of work our way back. We got Michigan, Iowa. It's a great thing that they're looking really good. So there are some opportunities here, but it was such a gut-wrenching loss. But anyway, Ben, thank you so much for joining me, and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks, Jonah.
All right. Ben Cross, happy to have him on. Fun to bring him back. It'd been a little bit of time, so I'm glad that he is back with us on the program. Okay. Final topic of the day, my Malkins moments. I have a couple really good Malkins moments for you right before we head off. I know I'm closing in on that 9 a.m. finish. So a couple notable, or really one major notable Malkins moment from the MLB. I don't know if you guys have been following Vladimir Guerrero Jr., but he just hit his 45th home run of the season to pass Shohei Ohtani for the home run lead in the MLB. This is a guy who's only in his third year in the majors. In 2019, as a rookie, he batted over 272 with 15 home runs, and now you fast forward to this year, a couple years later in his third year, this guy's batting 315, 404 on base percentage, 617 slugging percentage, above a 1 OPS, and even passed his dad, Vladimir Guerrero's single season record for most home runs for him in a season. He had 44. His son, Junior, has now passed him on with 45, which is amazing. And again, this is the history. This is the company that he's a part of. For guys in the MLB at 22 years of age or younger, at least 22 years of age, at no older than 20 years, here are the other players in MLB history that had at least 45 home runs. Johnny Bench did it in 1970, Eddie Matthews in 1953, and Joe DiMaggio in 1937. That's it. That's the company that he's a part of. And right now you got the Toronto Blue Jays at 81 and 64. They're tied atop the wild card standings with the Yankees right now. That's going to be a tight finish. Looking forward to seeing that. In golf, couple moments as well. Will Zalatoris won the PGA Rookie of the Year award. He was the first non-PGA Tour member to win the award in 20 years, since 2001. Since Charles Howell III did it. He was the last player to win the PGA Tour Rookie of the Year as a special kind of temporary member. And this is a guy in Zalatoris who's 25 from Dallas. He finished 8 times in the top 10. He was the runner-up at the Masters. Big shout out to him. And then finally, big shout out to Patrick Cantley, who beat John Rahm for the PGA Player of the Year this past year. He captured the Jack Nicklaus Award, winning 4 victories this past season, including the FedEx Cup at the Tour Championship. He won the BMW Championship. His 4 victories were twice as many as the next closest guy as anyone else. He's had a fantastic season, and big shout out to all 3 of those guys. I didn't even have the little ticker at the bottom. That's okay. You knew what it was. Malkins moments. That'll do it for us. That's all the time that we got for you today. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Morning Joe on a Wednesday, jam-packed Wednesday, right here on YouTube, Facebook Live, Twitter, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Mondays and Wednesdays, make sure to review, subscribe, comment, like the page, follow me on YouTube, Morning Joe with Jonah Malkin, on Twitter at morning_Joe_Jonah Malkin, and all that jazz. That'll do it for us. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.